Hey there, everyone. Welcome to the Sasquatch Outpost podcast. We are in episode 16 tonight, and we've got a great guest for you, and I can't wait to introduce her in just a few minutes. But just wanted to recap what we did last week. It was quite an interview with Melba Ketchum, Adrian Erickson, Dennis Full, and Randy Brisson, and that the study that we talked about last week, the Sasquatch genome study, was controversial in 2013. It's still controversial. People are still disputing the result of that, and probably always will until somebody else comes forward with another study that either confirms or disproves what they believe came out of that study. But it was an interesting discussion, and I'm not going to say whether I'm siding 100% on what they found or didn't find, but I thought it was a really good interview. I thought Dr. Ketchum explained as well as she could what she felt like the study revealed 10 years down the road. And it was interesting that they had not seen each other in several years, and certainly not even been on the same interview since their press conference 10 years ago, 10 years ago in September, I think. So in any case, quite a show. I'm glad we were able to do that. Last week, right after the podcast, the next morning, I left for a backpacking trip in Lost Creek Wilderness, that Goose Creek where I've been before, and I went with a buddy who flew in from California to go with me. And I'm usually going in there in March and April, so there's a lot of snow. The creek is usually frozen or mostly frozen, so we can get back and forth. Well, we got in there, got up to where we thought we wanted to camp. We could see on the other side of the river where we wanted to camp, but we had to get across the river. So, I had never seen it that deep. And so we were talking about how we're going to do this. And I have a bad knee from a skiing accident almost 5 months ago. And so Bill said, look, I'm willing to carry the packs across the river if you will, if you can go in there a little bit and just see how soft or firm the bottom is. So I get in there and it's up to my waist, and it's like, it's so cold. And and I'm walking in and I'm sinking in the sand, and I'm thinking, man, if it sinks in any farther, I'm really going to be. So I had taken some of the stuff off my backpack to carry it across. So I get halfway across and I drop my inflatable pad, and it starts floating downstream, and I reach for it, and then I hear something go kabloosh, and I look down, and my Garmin inReach device is on the bottom of the stream. And so I'm looking down, I'm looking at the other thing. So Bill says, you want me to grab that? So he runs downstream, and he can't reach it. So he just sacrifices his body. He just jumps in the water, completely soaked. And I hear him going, oh my God, that's so cold. And so I had to go underwater to get down and grab my inReach. I did find out they were waterproof, apparently, and it worked when we got it out. But yeah, that was quite a I've never had to get to a campsite in quite such a dramatic way. But I wanted to show you, this is a panorama I took on the second day we were there, of that's Bill there in the middle, right by the tree, but it's just a gorgeous, gorgeous area. And there's right above us, there was this little tree growing out of this crack in the rock. And I'm thinking, how does that tree even have enough roots to grow in there? And then we had a really weird thing happen. We had taken up above our campsite, we had taken some gifts to put up there for Sasquatch, which I almost always do when I'm out camping or backpacking. So we had several different colored rocks, and Bill had this white rock and this little black polished stone that he got, which when he bought it, he asked the woman if it was onyx, and she said, no, it's not onyx, but she gave another name. So we went up there. He put those two down. I put mine out there, and I'm looking at his, and it was clearly a black rock. So went up there the next day and looked at it, and they hadn't done anything. Everything was the same place. And so the day we left, my knee was bothering me, and it was a pretty steep climb. So I asked Bill if he would go up and take a look, tell me if anything was changed, and then if there was, I'd walk up there. Otherwise, I was going to stay down below. So he hikes up there, and he's standing there looking at it, and he doesn't say anything. And I said, well, what's going on up there? And he goes, well, everything's in the same place, but there's a, he said something weird. I said, what? He said, that black rock I brought up here is now sparkling green. I said, what? And so I'm going to show you a picture. Now, I cannot explain this. It's hard to see in this picture, but there are sparkles in this rock. When you turned it to the sun, it clearly sparkled green, bright sparkles inside. And we looked at this and we're like, and I asked him, wasn't it like that before? And he said, I've had this rock for several months and it has been jet black all this time. He said, I can't explain it. He said, it's the same rock, same size, everything, same shape. Now it's got green sparkles in it. And we looked at each other and we're like, okay, that's just totally weird. I don't know how to explain that. I can't even explain it. I'm not even going to try. So, but you know, one of those weird things that happens when you're out doing what we do. Hey, if you haven't been to a cave talk yet, we've got one tomorrow at 7 p.m. at the Outpost. Lots of room left. And I'm going to be talking about some of my research and particularly some of the eye shine, eye glow that we've seen. So if you're interested, you don't need to sign up online. You can just show up and pay in cash. It's $25 a person, and we'll start at 7. And anyone who's interested in doing something fun this weekend, if you have never ridden the Georgetown Loop Railroad, it's Old West days, and you just might see a few people there you recognize doing Old West reenactments. So it's great fun. If you got kids and you want to do something and you don't mind getting a little wet, potentially, we'll see what the weather does, but we'd love to have you come up and join us Saturday or Sunday at the Georgetown Loop Railroad. So the network, Untold Radio Network, has a new promo that I'm going to show here for YouTube memberships. So let me just play this real quick.
Hey, Untold Radio Network fans. Want exclusive perks and to support our channel? Introducing our YouTube membership program with 3 amazing levels. Get loyalty badges that level up to different cryptids the longer you're a supporter. How cool is that? You'll also get access to custom Bigfoot emojis and priority in chat. Upgrade to Backstage Pass for exclusive wallpapers, photos, status updates, discounted books, and merchandise. Go all in with the producer level for everything mentioned plus member shoutouts. Ready for an enhanced experience? Join now, pick your membership level, and let's make this journey even more exciting together.
So that's a new thing they're doing that the network has just come up with, is different levels of membership and different rewards. And they've got something else. Let me show you this. They've created T-shirts for each of the podcasts. So this is what our T-shirt will look like right here. So So if you're interested, you can go to the Untold Radio Network website and look at all the shirts. Every podcast has their own shirt, and you can order those there. Something fun, something new they're doing. Okay, I am going to play a little intro here, and then I'm going to bring Laura in. So give me just a second to do this.
compelled to still make the case for the existence of Bigfoot?
Well, I'm satisfied that this Bigfoot thing exists.
That's right, Bigfoot. We've been hearing about Bigfoot for a long time, centuries at least, from ancient tribal stories.
And of course, you knew it was Tunaha, Sasquatch. And every family has their own story and interpretation of an ancestor seeing that creature.
Right up till today.
Bigfoot has become the supreme cryptozoological monster of the United States.
It's the rustling in the forest.
And I looked back to where we just ran from, and it had come out of the timberline. It was probably 7 to 8 feet tall, enormous, just looking at me.
The chill down your spine.
It let out a holler that would lift the hair right off the back of your head.
But these are just stories, right? Tall tales told around the campfire. I mean, there's no way that Bigfoot's actually real. At least that's what I thought. But now, I'm looking at something that makes me rethink everything. What?
So we've got Laura Krantz with us tonight. Laura, glad you could be here.
Thank you for having me. It's nice to see you again, although I got to see you in person not that long ago.
Yeah, when we did a book signing, and those books have been selling well. I'm going to have to get some more from you.
Oh, great. I'm glad to hear that.
And I hear you're working on another book. Is that right?
Yeah. So there will be a second book coming out this October. That one's based off the second season of the podcast, which was
Okay.
on the search for extraterrestrial life.
right.
And then the third book will be out. I have to turn the manuscript in like practically tomorrow. But the book won't be out until October of 2024. And that is based on the third season of the podcast, which is atomic energy. So I bounce
Okay.
around. I like lots of different things.
Well,
And Jim,
yes.
your cold water story.
Yeah.
You might not know this, but one of the things I do in my spare time is ice bathing.
Oh.
My husband's also a journalist, and he wrote a book about cold water immersion and using that to sort of control some of your body's stress responses. So I take ice baths pretty
Oh.
regularly.
How do you do that? Where do you take an ice bath?
We have an ice bath in our backyard that has cold water circulating through it. And it's got a filter on it and stuff. So we'll go in, a few times a week and sit there for a few minutes. And it's actually really good for aches and pains, especially as I'm getting on in my years.
Do you have a sauna to get into after that or before?
We do.
that?
Yeah.
So you
we
kind
do.
of have to have both of those, I would think,
Yeah.
a sauna and an ice bath. I was just listening to Joe Rogan. He does the same thing. He's got a sauna and an ice bath. And, well, jumping in that river, I don't know, what temperature is your ice bath?
Right now, I think it's about 38. I'm guessing the river you were in was probably about 33 or 34, given that runoff.
Yeah, there was no ice on the river, but it was cold, very cold. And yeah. So we went back on the same side of the bank. We didn't cross the river going back. It was a harder hike, but we did not want to face that again. We both decided if we had to go back across, we were going to strip down to nothing, carry our backpacks, and then get dressed again because otherwise we were going to be hiking out and soaking wet, cold.
Yeah, that's not fun.
No, not at all. So for those who don't know Laura is a journalist, editor, and producer in both radio and print, and co-founder of Foxtopus. Is that the right
Yeah,
pronunciation?
it's a fox and an octopus. It's a foxtopus.
Foxtopus Inc. Her podcast, Wild Thing, has received critical acclaim from Scientific American, Rolling Stone, and The Atlantic, which named it one of the best 50 podcasts in 2018 and 2020. So let me show you guys. This is her original podcast, Wild Thing. I love the two woman's shoes inside the Bigfoot footprints. That was a classic design.
I have a story about that. I'll tell that in a second.
Okay. And then she's done 2 more since then. So season 2 and season 3, one on Space Invaders and then on nuclear energy. I almost said nuclear. Nuclear energy.
It's a tough one.
It is. And she's got the left-hand book is written and in print, and we're selling it, The Search for Sasquatch. And I guess the one on the right is the one you're trying to finish.
No, the one on the right is the one that'll be out in October. The one I'm trying to
okay.
finish won't be out for more than a year.
Okay.
Book publishing takes a very long time.
So the one on the right is done. It's just
Yep.
not in print yet.
Yeah, it's
Okay.
currently being printed right now as we speak.
Okay. And for those who don't know as well, Laura is related to this man, Grover Krantz, who is a very famous, if you've been around the Bigfoot world for any time, you've heard of Grover Krantz. He was one of the pioneers of Sasquatch research, although he never himself saw one, did he?
Nope, he didn't. And he was annoyed by it. He was like, I just want to
I'm
know
sure.
one way or another.
Well, he seemed to be sure in interviews I've heard with him, he seemed to be sure they existed. He really wanted to kill one for the sake of science and have a body. And then kind of showing the person he was, he donated his body and his Irish wolfhound to the Smithsonian. And are they on display now there?
So that's a good question. Somebody was emailing me recently and said they tried to go find him and he was not there. He was there the last time I went to DC, but that was a couple of years ago now. So,
okay. Interesting.
I know that the museum has been undergoing some renovations, so maybe they moved him or maybe they switched him out. But there was a lot of effort that went into creating that particular exhibit. Trying to wire up 2 skeletons like that was extremely difficult. So I can't imagine that they took it apart. It may just be in storage and they'll bring him out again at some point.
Well, I gather too, he gave his body to the body farm.
He did.
Which we have one of those in Park County where people who donate their body, it's to study decay, basically how bodies decay.
Yeah, it's fascinating. It's for forensics. So they can, like, if a body has been in a trunk or under the water, it's a little grotesque, but it's also, it just helps, scientists figure out the state of decay, what bugs show up. And then that way, if they find bodies, out in the wild, they can have a good sense of when time of death and like what might be going on.
Exactly. So it's an important part of science, although most people don't know that those farms exist, but that just sounds like what a scientist would do: donate his body to science, and in hopes that his body will create some new knowledge for the sake of his fellow scientists. But did you ever figure out how you're related exactly to him?
Yes, he is my grandfather's cousin.
Okay.
I never met him, unfortunately. I only learned about him after he'd already passed. But what's funny is he taught at Washington State University, which was about 2 hours up the road from where I went to college. And I think we would have overlapped. If I'd known he was there, I could have gone up there. But yeah, he would show up at my grandfather said he would show up at the family picnic with calipers measuring people's heads, and was a scientist from the moment he was a kid. My grandfather was probably 7 or 8 years older than him, and he was in the first medical school class at the University of Utah, and he knew Grover was really into anatomy, and so he stole a hand for him from the anatomy.
Wow.
I'm not sure if it was skeletonized. I kind of hope it was, because otherwise that would be gross. And he gave it to Grover.
Wow.
So
yeah, that's the jokes that scientists play on each other.
Yeah, right.
So I know when you started the series, which has been about 5 years now, the first wild thing.
Yeah, the first season came out in October of 2018, and I started doing the research on it for it in like late 2016. I think is
Okay.
when I got started with it. Or no, probably 2017, early 2017. Oh, it looks like you froze, Jim. I don't know if this is me or you. I don't know if anyone can still hear. Well, hi. I don't know who's still watching this, but I am here. And what else can I tell you about Grover? I wish I'd known him. He sounds like he was a fascinating guy, but I didn't learn about him until I was living in Washington, D.C., and I was reading the Washington Post, and they had this big article about him because they were about to put up that exhibition of him and Clyde, his dog, in the museum. And so they had this huge, like 3-page spread about him, all these photos. He donated not only his bones and Clyde's bones, but there were 2 other Irish wolfhounds, Icky and Yahoo, which I think are the best names. Yeah, there's this huge long article in the Post talking about all of the work he'd done as an anthropologist and all of the things that he had been involved in terms of this, the questions that we had about human evolution and what people, where people might have migrated from, thousands and thousands of years ago. And so what he ended up, being involved in, I don't know if any of you remember the Kennewick Man debates, but there were big questions about like Kennewick Man, which was one of our long distance ancestors and sort of where he had come from and what his relation was. Oh, you're back.
I'm back. We had a near lightning strike and it
Oh my
threw whole
gosh.
system out. So I missed whatever you just were talking about while
I just was blathering on about Grover and how I'd found out about him, and I'd been reading that article in the Post where they were talking about all the work he'd done as an anthropologist.
Great. Well, thanks for covering. Yeah.
If I'd known how to juggle, I would have done that, but I don't.
It was I saw the flash and then it just went and everything
my gosh,
went off. So hopefully it doesn't happen again. But I started to ask you when you started the series, I think you were a skeptic. What would you say today? What were you? Did you change your opinion?
I'd say I'm still a skeptic, but I'd say maybe I'm a little more open-minded to the idea than I was before. Having talked to all these people who have had experiences, had sightings, like I can't dismiss those out of hand. I don't know what they saw, but it's really interesting experiences that they've had. It also sort of showed me that, it got into why people are fascinated with Bigfoot, even if they don't necessarily believe. Like I had a lot of great conversations with people about why Bigfoot was important. And I think that makes me want Bigfoot to be out there, even though I haven't yet seen the kind of proof that, would stand up to scientific scrutiny. And I think that Grover would have found acceptable either. So yeah, that's kind of where I am. But, if somebody can find that body or the big piece of the body or the DNA, I'd be pretty excited.
Well, yeah. I mean, I think I've been a believer since I was a kid. And I think my wife was convinced by the numbers of people who come into our museum and tell us a story. I think we're past 350 now. And
wow.
And she just said, the first few she kind of doubted and thought, but after time after time after time, doctors, law enforcement officers, animal control officers, people coming in who had every reason to not say anything and no reason to lie. And so it was it was, phenomenal that, finally after probably 50 or 60, she said, I just can't doubt this anymore. There's too many. Let's see this question. Oh, that's just a thanks for having you on the show.
Oh, yeah.
But you did 9 episodes, correct? Of that first
Yeah,
series?
there were 9 main episodes, and then there were 5 bonus episodes, which were just kind of interviews with Bigfoot adjacent people, including Bob.
Yeah.
Gimlin.
And you're one of the shows. We were fortunate to be featured in episode 8. The Outpost was, and it's funny, I listened to that again yesterday before this show today, and I thought, boy, we have changed so much since you were on. I mean, we had one tiny little room in the museum. We've doubled and almost tripled it now, and we added, I mean, it's just not even the same museum now, but back then we had Boomer, who was my creation, and we now have a professionally built animatronic Sasquatch. So things have changed, but which was kind of fun to see, to hear rather, the changes. And just, I could tell just from listening to the sounds, when we were in the museum, it's a different soundtrack. Everything's different now. So
yeah, it was fun to come back and visit you in October again and get to go through, and it's like, doubled, maybe tripled in size, and
right.
Totally. I think Boomer's gone, right? Didn't you get
Boomer is now,
or he's been moved somewhere,
living in Estes Park, I think, at the Sasquatch donut shop, if I'm not mistaken. So he went
Sasquatch
up to,
loves donuts, I'm told.
Yeah, I'm sure. He went up to the museum in Hastings for a while, and then I think he got moved to, came back to Estes. But he's still around. Hopefully he will be for a long time. But so of the 9 actual episodes you did, and you travel all over the country, I know, doing that, and you were in the woods in several places, including here. What would you say was the most compelling thing that you saw or heard in all those times?
I have to say I was pretty disappointed. I didn't see, I personally did not have any experiences. I went out with Shane Corson of the Olympic Project, and he was so gracious with his time. And I think we might have gone on, we went on 2 different adventures together, and such a lovely man. And I was really, really hoping we were going to have some sort of encounter, and we didn't. So I would say that there were a couple things that really stood out to me. One was John Mayenzinski's story.
Remind me of that story.
So John Mayenzinski, he was working for Wyoming Fish and Game. And wildlife. And so he was up in the Wind River areas, and he just had a crazy experience where this thing kept coming up to his tent in the night and pressing against it. And initially he thought it was a bear, because there was a huge bacon grease stain on the tent, because the last person at the Forest Service or the Wildlife Service had failed to get the tent cleaned in time. And so John had to take this delicious smelling tent with him out into the woods. And so I think he thought for sure it was a bear, but like he hit it and it came back, he hit it and it came back, he hit it and it came back a third time. And the third time it was standing above the tent with like its hand. He could see the silhouette because it was a full moon. He said it was a hand with a thumb and like hair between it. And then, John like got out of the tent and ran to sit by the fire, and then this thing started lobbing pine cones at him, and he never did figure out what it was. So even he said, I can't 100% say that it was a Bigfoot, but it was such a crazy story, and it just sort of made the hair on the back of my neck stand up, because he was so well versed in science and the outdoors and all of the creatures that were out in those areas. And then the other thing that I found really compelling was actually talking to Ian Tattersall, who was the curator emeritus at the American Museum of Natural History in New York. And he has done a ton of stuff on human evolution. And he was telling me about all the different hominids, all the different sort of human relatives that existed once upon a time. And there were as many as 8 when we were walking around, and potentially even more. And we, may not have found the fossils for all of them. And there was something very interesting about hearing about all these species that had been around while we were around and now are not. And I kind of wondered if, Bigfoot might have been one of those creatures where it had been in existence and, the population slowly died out, but the stories remained. Yeah, those were two of the things that really kind of caught my attention.
Yeah, I mean, I take people out all summer long, and of course, everyone wants to have an encounter. And I wish I could guarantee that.
Yeah.
I could charge $10,000 a person if I could guarantee that Sasquatch would come out, but that's kind of the nature of the beast, pardon the pun, but they come out when they want to and they don't when they don't. And I've had many, many, many encounters, and I've had many with people that I've taken out, and where they will be, something is shadowing us along the trail at midnight, and we can hear the noise of it cracking, and we stop and it stops, and then we start, and on both sides of us. And it's just not behavior that bear or deer do. I mean, it's just something they don't do. And so it had to be an intelligent being, because it knew, it was watching us. It was paying attention to whether we were walking or not. And I've had them pushing on my tent as well a couple of times now. And it's either, and I knew it wasn't a bear. So it's either another person or a Sasquatch. And if it's another person, you're kind of taking a big risk, because most people who go camping around here have some kind of a weapon in their camp, in their tent. And so if someone were to freak out and decide, I don't know what that is out there, but I'm going to shoot it anyway, so if it's people, they're taking a big risk. And so I think, I didn't, my girls have often asked me, why don't you just unzip the tent and look, and I have on occasion, but the time it takes to unzip your tent is plenty of time for a Sasquatch to step away and be not visible at that point.
It's also surprisingly noisy.
It is very. I mean, unzipping, if you're trying to sleep and you've got someone unzipping a tent nearby, it's very noisy.
Yeah.
So they know when you're unzipping or zipping. I was out with my first research partner, and we were camping, and during the night we were out by Buffalo Peaks Wilderness. I know you know where that is, on the way to Buena Vista. And twice in the night, he didn't hear this, but he listened on his recording later. Twice something unzipped his tent and zipped it back again, and he never knew it. And so, I'm thinking, it was looking in, something was looking in at him, or, it's just creepy as all get out, thinking 2 times, 30 minutes apart, something unzipped his tent and zipped it back. And I said, well, it probably was good you weren't awake, because that would have been quite a frightening experience potentially. So
you'd never go camping again.
Yeah, I know. I remember in your episode, where you were out with Shane, and he showed you what he believed were nests, or a nesting site. Tell me about that. What did you think about that?
Yeah. So I'll give a little bit of background to people who might not know. Essentially, what had happened was there was some private forestry land up on Washington's Olympic Peninsula. And the guy who owned the land was out walking the forest, taping off trees that they were planning to harvest. And he came across what were essentially these what looked like giant nests, like giant birds' nests. And of course, he's scratching his head, and he's wondering, how these got built, who had gotten out onto their land, because it's gated and it's locked. And so he calls up both the Olympic Project, and he also calls up Washington's Fish and Game. And I may be getting some of the details a little off. It's been a while since I've told this story, but both parties came out, sent people out, and the Fish and Game people were kind of scratching their heads. They said it didn't look like any sort of bear bed or deer bed that they'd ever come across before in their work in the woods. And the Olympic Project people also said they hadn't seen anything like it before. And so the guy who owned the land said, hey, you know what? I will hold off on harvesting this set of trees and we'll go somewhere else. And I will give you guys keys and access to the land for the next 5 years. So you can set up here and see what you see and see what you can find and see if you can figure anything out. And so I believe the Olympic Project people went out there pretty regularly and sort of, set up. They would basically just sit there or camp there and wait to see if anything came back. And as far as I know, I don't think anything did. And then I believe they got in touch with Jeff Meldrum over at Idaho State University.
Mm-hmm.
And Dr. Meldrum went out there with them, and he took samples from the nests, and he was in a good relationship with Dr. Todd Disotell, who at the time was a molecular primatologist at New York University. Todd does not think Bigfoot is out there. I believe he told me he is 99.9% sure that Bigfoot is not out there. But like me, I think he is open-minded to the idea that it might exist if he can get the right kind of evidence. And so Jeff sent the nest bits over to Todd. Todd ran them through their DNA scanner and did not get any hits other than human and some other degraded, possum, bunny rabbit, skunk, normal things that you would find in that area, except for a horse, he said, which means probably some of that stuff was contaminated. But probably 2 or 3 years after they had found these nests, I went out with Shane, and this is prior actually to the sampling happening and the testing, or prior to the testing. They'd done the sampling, but they hadn't had the testing done. So Shane took me out there, and I got a chance to see, oops, sorry, that was our doorbell.
No worries.
And I got a chance to see them, and they did look like giant birds' nests. Like they're really weird. They look like they had been sort of braided together and created by something. They were pretty badly degraded by the time I saw them, but it was clear that they were some sort of structure. And there were a bunch of them. There were big ones, there were smaller ones. And so it definitely left me scratching my head and wondering what might have come out of that, or what might have created it.
Well, there must have been a ton of hair if Sasquatch had used those.
Yeah, they didn't find any hair, at least in
Wow.
the samples that got sent. Now, of course, the point that Jeff had made to me, and also Todd made this point as well, was that these nests had sat out in the elements for quite a significant amount of time before anyone took the samples. So there's a chance things were degraded. There's a chance it didn't capture the DNA of every creature that had been there. But hair would have been pretty well embedded into something like that. And there was no discussion of hair, at least in the conversations I had with Todd.
In your research, did you hear about the what seems to be, I think, a recognized fact now that Sasquatch hair has a very different morphology than human hair, for instance, or other animals in terms of the I'm trying to think of the it's not the core. There's another word they use for hair, but it has a different morphology, strikingly different than human. Did you do anything on hair when you were doing your?
That didn't come up that much when I was looking into this. I did talk to Todd a little bit about it, and he said that it's actually quite difficult to get DNA from hair unless the hair happens to fall out at just the right moment. And still has that sort of root attached to it. And there might be some DNA in there, but other than that, it's very difficult. But that's really about as far as I went with hair. And, even Dr. Meldrum, when I talked to him, now granted, these were several years ago, so I don't know. And as you know, I've gone on to different projects, so I haven't paid as close of attention, but even Dr. Meldrum said, like, the hair on your head is different from the hair on your arms, is different from the hair on your nose. If you have nose hair, I don't. So yeah, that was another point that was brought up to me. So it's kind of hard to tell necessarily where hair comes from.
Sure. Yeah. I've heard that. I know, Doug Hychek has done a lot of study on hair, and he says that you can tell, in his opinion, you can tell Sasquatch hair under a microscope. I mean, not just visually you can't, but under a microscope by the way the core of the hair looks and the scales on the outside. So I was just curious if you had looked into that when you were doing your research at all.
No, that's not one that came up.
Yeah, interesting.
And, you know, I will be completely honest here. You know, I was sort of doing a survey, consider it
Right.
sort of Bigfoot 101. It was never going to be as in-depth or
Sure.
as up to date on things as people who have spent years like you and others looking into this topic and really doing a lot of research and thinking and talking to all kinds of people. Like
Sure.
it was very introductory for me. So yeah, I'm
But
sure there were other things I missed as well.
because of that, it was a great introduction for a lot of people who had never, you know, thought much about Bigfoot, and it was certainly at a level for anybody to listen and say, "Huh, I never thought about that," or because I think, you know, nowadays, and even since Wild Thing was done 5 years later, things are changing so rapidly in
Yeah.
the world of Sasquatch research. And when we first built the museum, well, when we first started our story, even before we built the museum, people would come in, and if they had a story to tell, they would wait till there was nobody in the store. I mean, they didn't want anybody to hear, and they would look around, make sure nobody was listening, and they would come up and they would whisper their story. And because they were so afraid of being mocked and made fun of. And so now it's very common that someone comes in and we'll start talking, and they're telling a story or I'm telling a story, and, you know, half dozen other people stop what they're doing, shopping, whatever, and come over and listen. That just didn't happen 10 years ago. So things have changed. And I think it's because of your podcast and all the documentaries and other things that are out there now that have exposed a lot of people to it. Now, it doesn't mean there's a lot more believers, but I think there's a lot more awareness. That's the word I would use. There's a lot more awareness about Bigfoot research and stuff that's going on. I mean, the movies that are made are pretty worthless. Most of the fictional movies are just Bigfoot is a bloodthirsty monster that kills hapless teenagers that go out in the woods and, you know, find a cabin, etc.
Well,
So,
they should be home doing their homework, so that's their own
right.
damn fault.
Exactly. And that's they capitalize on that in those movies. But
Yeah.
still, my opinion, the best movie ever made about Bigfoot was Harry and the Hendersons, and just a great movie, great story, and no bloodshed and everything else that you typically find today. But
I got to talk to the director for that.
Did
That's
you
one of those
really?
yeah, it was one of the bonus episodes that I did. And why I'm blanking on his name right now. I don't know why I can't remember it. It'll come back to me in the middle of the night, I'm sure. But he was lovely, and he said that it was one of the most fun movies that he'd been involved in. And the thing he really wanted to do was make sure that the eyes were right.
Now, was
He
that
wanted-
was that a animatronic? They had an animatronic.
No, there was a
Sasquatch, no?
person in there.
I knew there was a person in a suit, but I thought they also had like a waist up animatronic Sasquatch or something.
I don't think so. I mean, maybe for a couple of scenes, but he really wanted the eyes to be right.
Yeah.
So he had a person in there, so it would have very
Wow.
human looking eyes.
Well,
And
it did.
the main character in it, the main doctor scientist guy in there was loosely based off of Grover, which I thought was,
Oh, really?
yeah.
You mean the French guy that was chasing him? Or?
No, not the French guy. That one I think was supposed to be more God, I'm forgetting all of these names, Jim. I'm sorry. The French Canadian guy who was one of the four horsemen of Sasquatchery along with Peter Byrne and
Yes. Yeah.
Grover and John Green.
Yes.
Renee, is that his name?
Renee. Yeah. I can't remember his last name
yeah.
either.
But that was supposed to be the French guy, and then the American one, who is sort of an anthropologist type. He was loosely modeled after Grover.
Now that's interesting because those early pioneers, I would put John Bendernagel in there and a few others, Ron Moorhead, but some of whom are still alive, but many of them have passed away now, as Grover has. But they did a great service and they were mocked. I mean, I know Grover was and still is probably by some people who mocked. Here's this scientist, he's qualified, he had tenure, et cetera, but he believes in Bigfoot. And I'm sure Meldrum gets the same thing. In fact, I asked him, he was in our store not too long ago, and I also asked him on my podcast, how does University of Idaho, deal with you? And he said, well, depends on the person. It depends on the department. And so, some people understood what he was trying to do. And for other people, he's just, a crackpot in that respect. I think they respect him for his knowledge about anthropology and anatomy, but, the Bigfoot side is still for many people a joke. And it will take, as you said, finding a body to be definitive. I believe there's definitive evidence already, but for most people, you're going to have to find a body, and then they're going to have to convince everyone that the body is real, that it wasn't, made by somebody, because there's a number of hoaxsters who've made Bigfoot bodies and tried to convince people that they were a real dead body. Rick Dyer, among others.
That's the advantage of DNA now, and
Yes.
how good DNA testing has become, is you can get that answer, and you don't have to necessarily play along with a hoax or get sucked in.
And I've heard that now, and I can't remember where I heard this recently, but maybe you know something about this, but they can get DNA from the air and know what creatures had recently been in that area.
Interesting. I'd not heard air. I'd heard dirt. This was how they discovered some of these ancient hominid species that we didn't know about before, as they were getting samples of dirt and seeing that there was DNA in that dirt that was showing there were species that had been there that we didn't have in the record, so to speak. And I know that there was a guy in Scotland who was doing samples. Environmental DNA is what this called. So he was doing samples of the water in Loch Ness. He wanted to just see if, the stories about the Loch Ness monster might be true. He didn't think they were, but he was like, what else could be in there? And so they pulled out all this different kind of DNA. And there is some speculation that it might be a species of large eel that was living in the lake.
Interesting.
Yeah. And
Because
this was a few years ago that I read that. So I don't know what has happened since then, but I always thought that was kind of fascinating.
So they found some eel DNA, apparently.
Yeah.
Okay.
And one of my favorite things that Todd Disotell told me was that, they were doing sampling of the plaque on the teeth, on the skulls and the teeth of Neanderthals. And they found that by doing the DNA samples from that, they found that the Neanderthals that were living in sort of the area around Germany, what is now Germany, had woolly rhino in their teeth.
Oh, wow.
And the ones that were living in Spain had seafood. And so I just found that mind blowing. And also it's a good reason to floss.
Yeah.
A lot.
Yeah. Unless they find the woolly mammoth in our teeth. But that's interesting. I didn't realize they could get DNA off of a fossil.
Yeah. I think it can be a little bit difficult, but it's easier. Teeth, I think, are particularly good. And there's some other body part, and I'm forgetting which one it was.
Yeah, because we have not found a definitive fossil that would tell us that this was a Sasquatch, remains of a Sasquatch. And so, people are trying to bring Gigantopithecus and Sasquatch together, although I don't personally believe there's any evidence to link those two. But in the absence of anything else, you're kind of left, well, if Sasquatch is real, where's the past evidence of them?
Right.
And it's a valid question. I mean, I can't answer that one for
well,
sure.
And this was the other thing that Ian Tattersall at the Natural History Museum was telling me, was like, he said that, it's very hard to become a fossil. You've got to die at the right time under
Yeah.
the right circumstances, be buried by the right kind of rock and sediment. And then you have to be, survive all the tectonics and all the movement of rock over thousands of years. And then you have to be uncovered at the right moment by the right person who knows what they're doing and can dig you out. And then someone bothers to sample you. The thing that I've always wondered is, we excavated a lot of fossils long ago when we didn't have
Right.
the tools we do now. And I feel like it would be fascinating to go back through these collections and see what we can find and sample for DNA and see what comes up. I mean, we could have
A
bones of
great
things that
point.
we've never imagined.
Yeah.
So,
No, it's a valid point, because certainly paleontology science has increased dramatically over the past
yeah.
20, 30 years as well. So yeah, I hadn't even thought about that. The fact that to become a fossil, I mean,
Yeah.
stuff that dies in the woods rots. I mean, it just rots.
Right.
It's not left. I mean, I know there's places in like California and the Brea tar pits where the circumstances were just right. The tar was a medium that preserved it, but that doesn't happen very often. So
yeah, Colorado, I think actually does okay because there are certain minerals in the soil and in the rock that help preserve. Plus, it's so dry here. But yeah, if you end up in the forest and it's raining a lot,
you're gonna rot.
Yeah.
Yeah. You're not gonna. There's nothing. Some bones may be left, but yeah, I hadn't even thought about that. That surely animals rotted back then like they do now when they died.
Yeah.
And so it's just crazy to wonder. And I hadn't even realized that the circumstances had to be just right for a fossil to be made. So that makes sense. And why there's nothing that indicates Sasquatch. And maybe somebody's going to dig one up one of these days, and we're going to find out that, it's a relative of whatever, what other hominid existed before us, or maybe not, if they really are interdimensional, if they really are some of these other things, there may not be a fossil record at all. So I think that's a compelling question that's going to have to be answered in the next few years. But I think I'm curious, as you look ahead after doing your series, and I know you, like you said, you've moved on to aliens and nuclear energy, and but what would you, other than finding a body, what would you hope might be the next development in Sasquatch research?
I mean, I think a fossil would be really cool. I think if they could go through some of those old bone collections, and I know they're doing this in some places, but museums don't have a lot of money, and those kinds of programs don't have a lot of money. So that's time consuming and probably not their highest priority. But I think that would be cool if they started going through and were like, wait a minute, what is this? I think that would be pretty exciting.
I mean, without a body currently, if you had a fossil, you could only surmise that was a Sasquatch because we have nothing to compare it with.
Right.
And of course, there's all kinds of conspiracy theories about, well, the government has bodies, has live specimens, has, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, I don't know that I buy those. I don't know that the government really has any reason to cover something like that up.
Which is always the question, why? Why would they cover it up?
Yeah.
I mean, the whole UFO thing was covered up, may not be the right word, but they weren't forthcoming for a long time about all the information that they had and the video evidence from the U.S. fighter pilots, et cetera, that was been there for decades, but they never declassified it. So, yeah, I mean, I would love to see the government, if they had something, that they would come forward for whatever reason and say, okay, yes, there's UFOs, and yes, there's Sasquatch. And
the other conspiracy theory I heard, which I also don't buy into entirely, is that the logging industry is covering it up because they don't want to have to stop logging in case a Sasquatch is found.
Oh, yeah, I don't
know if I buy that one either.
No.
Those are pretty big secrets for a lot of people to have to keep. So
any major conspiracy has to have hundreds, if not thousands, of people keeping secrets, and we're just not that good at.
no, we're
keeping
terrible at
secrets.
it.
And so, so I think one of these days, I do think Sasquatch have been killed. I think they've been hit by cars. I've heard multiple stories, and there's certainly people like Justin Schmeha who talks about having shot one. But it's going to take somebody. It's going to take a researcher or someone else or a hunter shooting one and being able to hold on to that body until we could get some evidence. And I've talked to other researchers before about this, and we've said, well, what would we do if we're out in the woods and we came across a Sasquatch body?
Yeah.
And probably the last thing I would do is call a press conference or let any authorities know, because I would want to call my scientist friends and say, let's do as much analysis as we can do before we have to put this out there. That obviously sooner or later it has to get out there that you have this, but I would want to get as much independently corroborated evidence before the body would be taken. And I'm pretty sure it would be taken by the authorities, because
I mean,
such a significant discovery.
It's like an archaeological discovery. It's like anything of that sort of significance. You definitely would have people involved.
Yeah. Well, it's an interesting question and hasn't happened yet. I've heard researchers talking between themselves about, have you had the conversation with any government agents, like telling you to stop what you're doing, or the conspiracies abound. I mean, it's just amazing. I've never had anybody come talk to me and say, you need to stop doing what you're doing or doing your podcast or whatever. So if that ever happens, we'll cross that bridge, but that's never happened yet. And
you let me know if that happens. I want to hear about it.
Yeah. When before we end here, when you came and did your episode in the museum, did we go out? Did I take you out?
No, we didn't end up going out. I think
we didn't.
I remember the weather not being great.
Okay.
But yeah, we did the tour of the museum, and then you and I did an interview, and I also got a chance to talk to Daphne, which was fantastic. And then you sent me up the road for somewhere to eat lunch that was quite good. And I can't remember what it was. I think it was on top of Crow Hill, and there was like a sandwich joint or something like that. So
question regarding nukes and UFOs, Robert Hastings' work. Are you familiar with his work?
I am not. I mean, I've heard that part of the reason one of the reasons some people think that we have not been contacted by aliens is because they've already wiped themselves out, because they also developed their own nuclear technology and then went a little too far with it. It's called the Great Filter Theory, but I don't know Robert Hastings, unfortunately.
But it's interesting, isn't it? The vast divergence of opinions between they've never made contact to they're here. They've been here for a long time. They're around us all the time. Our government's in touch with them, et cetera, et cetera. So we've gotten alien technology that we've used in our military, et cetera. So, I mean, the truth is somewhere in between these two completely divergent opinions. And just like it is between Sasquatch is an ape and Sasquatch is a human hominid, somewhere in between is truth. And I don't know exactly where that lies, but but I really appreciate you coming on. I wanted to honor your plans this evening. I know you got plans to be with some old friends, and I certainly want to make that.
Yeah, we might even eat
possible.
outside because it's not raining here for the first time in I don't know how many weeks. So I'm pretty excited about that.
Good deal. Well, thank you, Laura, for giving us an hour of your time. And
of course, thank you for having me on, Jim. It was nice
you
chatting
bet.
with you.
And I can't wait to. I've never heard your second series, so I need to listen to that, and then your third series. But as much as I love the first, I'm sure I'm going to love the other two. So
I hope so.
Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
Have a great evening.
You too. Bye-bye.
And for those, the rest of our listeners, next week, my plan is to have my first Sasquatch research partner John Warren with us. John and I have lots of stories to tell of things that happened to us when we were doing research together, and he will be with us, and he's a great storyteller. So you're going to have a treat with John next week. And thank you all for being with us, and I look forward to being with you again in a week.